فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب.
الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So inshallah today we'll get started where we left off in the book Durrat al-bayan and في usool al-imaan and by Dr. Mohamed yousri. And so we previously were talking in the chapter which is one of the most important chapters that we have here, which is the how do we take our deen and where do we get our deen from. And this is one of the most important things because the thing that separates al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah from the rest of the people out there that are, of course, that are Muslims and also other people other than Muslims is how do we take our information. And we talked about how we hold fast to the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is one of the key things that separates the Muslims from the rest of the world, and what separates al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah from the other groups, the deviant groups that have gone astray when it comes to the Quran and Sunnah, because they don't. They'll sometimes put something in front of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they have different reasons that they will bring up for why they do this. And inshallah today we'll talk about one of the reasons that that some of these groups that are in misguidance, that they will try to put something in front of the Quran and the Sunnah. And so the last thing that we talked about was how we interpret text. So we talked about how we interpret the Quran and the Sunnah with each other. So we interpret the Quran with the Quran. So there'll be some parts in the Quran where we don't understand what the meaning of that word, or like there'll be a word that comes up that is maybe like ambiguous, and then the ayat right after it will explain exactly what that word is that is ambiguous, such as was-samaa'i wat-tariq. So Allah, He swears by the sama, which is the sky, wat-tariq. And so like tariq means like you would say like this for someone who comes at night and they knock on your door. You would call this person a tariq. And then وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الطَّارِقُ. And then how would you know what a tariq is? And then Allah says النجم الثاقب. That right after this, then Allah explains what is that tariq, النجم الثاقب, which is a star that is a piercing star. And so Allah explains what the first part of that ayah was with the next thing. So this is an example of the Quran will interpret the Quran, and also the Sunnah will also interpret the Quran, and also sometimes it goes the opposite way, where the Sunnah will interpret or where the Quran will interpret some of the things that are ambiguous in the Sunnah, and also some of the Sunnah will interpret other parts of the Sunnah that could be ambiguous. So that's why we always need to put together all of the hadith. And so this is one way of interpretation. And we talked about also if we don't get what we're looking for, like if there's some type of information we need, or like an interpretation or clarity that we don't find in one of these two, then we take the way that the companions, they understood this issue. And so then after we look to that and we look into interpret with the understanding of the companions, because of course they were the ones that were there when the revelation was coming down. So of course they're the most knowledgeable about the revelation and about the state of affairs when the revelation was being revealed. And then also the people that took their path, and then we look to their sayings, which is like the tabi'in. So like we look at the people that lived with the companions, and then also lived with that first couple generations. And then if we don't find what, like if there's something that we still are looking, we still need to answer, then we look to what is correct in the Arabic language and its dialects. And of course this is something that a scholar does, someone who has knowledge of the Arabic language, and then they can look to what is that. And of course if it goes against any of these, then this is something that's rejected. Like if it goes against what the Quran and the Sunnah has already explained, or that what the sayings of the companions have explained in a matter, and they come up with something new that goes against everything, then this is something that is rejected. And also, if someone comes up with an interpretation for like a certain ayat or something of this that goes against what the Arabic language would be understood as, like there's no way that it works in Arabic, of course this is something that is rejected. And so this is where we stopped off in the last time, and we will pick up here where the next thing that the author he says is وَيَفْهَمُونَ وَعَلَى ظَاهِرِهَا الْمَقْبُولِ وَيَدْرَؤُونَ بَاطِلَ التَّأْوِيلِ. And so he says they understand it in an acceptable apparent meaning. And he says ظاهر, which is the word that is used oftentimes in like usool fiqh. We would say that there's a meaning that is ظاهر and there's a meaning that is marjuh, which means like the ظاهر is the one that's the apparent meaning. So if someone was to say something, yes, maybe everything that somebody can say could be taken in multiple ways, but there's an apparent meaning that we take this apparent meaning unless there's some type of evidence that takes us away from the apparent meaning. That is, and normally this evidence would be something that is found in the context, like the immediate context, or if there's something that would be like another text that pulls it away from its apparent meaning. And so we have some texts in the Quran that are their apparent meaning, it's clear and it's apparent, but maybe somebody could understand it in another way, and from this we don't say that yes, you can understand it in another way, and we just say it could be this way or this way when there's an apparent meaning that is blatant in front of us. We don't run to something other than that unless there is dalil that is pushing us toward this. And so like some of the ways of like the way that like the Arabs would speak, they would use things such as majaz, which is a type of metaphorical speaking, or saying something in a way that isn't necessarily direct, but you mean something else. And one of like an example of this is that when Allah says فَوَجَدَ جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَن يَنْقَضَّ فَأَقَامَ. And so like that they found, and this is talking about in Surah Al-Kahf, when Musa and Khadr alayhim as-salatu was-salam, they found a wall, like a jidar, yuridu an yanqadda, and which means that that the wall, like yuridu, which this is a term that normally would be referring to like people, which is like yuridu, which means he needs, or he wants, and like this wall wants to fall down. And so like this is one thing that some people will say, this is like the wall wanting to fall down. This is something that like this is just like a usloob, or like a way that the Arabs would say that this wall was about to fall down, like it was leaning over and it was like about to fall down. So then they stood it back up, and they so that they put it back upright. And so since the wall was like falling, it was as if it was wanting to fall over, but the wall was brought back upright. So most people wouldn't say the wall wanted to fall over, and this is the actual meaning, but rather it's a way that the Arabs would talk about things. If something was leaning or something, maybe you would say you would have like for a person, if he was leaning towards something and something he wanted to do. But as for a wall, this is something that would be taken in a different context. And there's many examples of this in the Quran. And some people have taken and said that there's no majaz in the Quran and whatnot, or in the Sunnah. And some have said there's not in the Quran, but there is in the Sunnah, but there is in Arabic. And some have said there's no majaz in the Quran or Sunnah, but there is in Arabic. And some said no, there's no majaz. It's only according to everything is taken in context, and in its context, it wouldn't be something that is like allegorical, or like some type of it wouldn't be like a strange interpretation or going away from the apparent meaning. And this is like a subject that, like, of course, is talked about more in detail when someone goes into usool fiqh. But this is a place where sometimes there will be this possible meaning that can be understood from a text, but we don't take this other like far out impossible or this far out possible meaning unless there's evidence pointing towards us. And of course, if somebody went down this road, there's no end to what they would. Then there's no end to it. Like if someone was to go, oh, it could be this way. Maybe we take it allegorical, or we take it in another way. Unless there's evidence in the text, or like in another text that is clear evidence that pulls it away, then this is something we always take it at its apparent meaning unless there's evidence. And the person who wants to take it away from its apparent meaning, then he needs to bring some type of evidence to the table, or else his whatever he has to say about this is something that is rejected. And so this is what he means here by they understand it in its acceptable apparent meaning. And then they throw away false interpretations or ta'wil. And this is the word ta'wil. And ta'wil is the action, like in Arabic there's other meanings to it, but the meaning that it's come into like use with people that are into tafsir, and also into different extracting the meanings of the Quran and the Sunnah. Ta'wil is a term that they would use for something that has that there's the apparent meaning, and then there's the meaning that is marjuh, or it's not necessarily apparent, but maybe there's a possibility to it. And so if they have an evidence that they bring to the table and they say we're going to change it from its apparent meaning and say that we're going to that it means something else, and if they bring evidence to it and the evidence is valid evidence, and it doesn't go against other dalil or like other evidence that is more strong, then this is okay, and this is ta'wil, but it's something that is acceptable. But if someone brings it to outside of its meaning, and they say no, this is something that our evidence is that this isn't logically possible, or something of this sort, and sometimes people will do this to take away the original meaning of the Quran, to put the meaning that agrees with their worldview into the Quran, and their evidence is something that goes against the Quran and the Sunnah and the apparent meaning and whatnot. Then this is something that is rejected. And some of the examples of this is in so many times in the Quran, Allah says ثُمَّ Allahu ala arsh istawa, or ثُمَّ استوى على العرش. And so like that Allah istawa is a term which means raised up, and it rose above, like we would say he rose above his throne. And this is the term that some of the people that got involved in like philosophy and ilm al-kalam, they said this doesn't mean rose up above, because if we said Allah rose up above, then he must have been lower than it before. They have all kinds of things that they say this going up and down means that Allah would have a place that he is, and then they want to refute this with their logical construct that they made trying to prove the existence of Allah in the first place. So then they made up a logical construct to prove Allah's existence, which of course if someone who is a sane person that actually like thinks about the existence, they know that Allah exists, and whether or not they have a construct that is based on some type of philosophical reasoning or not, this is something that a normal person on the fitrah, he knows, and he doesn't need some type of line of reasoning. But they came up with a line of reasoning that then at the end of it, for them to hold on to their argument, they have to negate that Allah has a place of existence, and they also have to negate that Allah has certain characteristics. And so because of this construct that they had, they pull any of the texts that come, and so when it says that Allah rose above his throne, then in this, instead of saying istawa, and they say that the meaning of this is istawla, which it's similar in the sound, and people say okay, maybe it's similar in sound, but they changed one letter in the word, like istawa into istawla. And the word istawla, it means like someone who conquered something. So if someone conquered a place, then you would say istawla alayh. And so like if like someone conquered a city or something, you would say istawla. And so they take this as that they say Allah conquered. Instead of saying istawa, which raised above, they say conquered his throne. And of course this also holds a very bad meaning as well, that Allah, that his throne wasn't in his possession until he conquered it. And so that's one problem with their reasoning. And they fall into a bunch of other reasonings, and they use a line of Arabic poetry to try to prove this point. In the line of Arabic poetry, there's no the evidence that this person actually said it in the time that they say it. This is something that is extremely debatable, and it's a single line of poetry that they use to change this one word from istola they change it to istola from istowa. And so, and this is something that is very weak. So we throw this we throw like this meaning that that they claim is something there. We throw it aside. One, because it doesn't fit in with Arabic. And, like if we don't have any evidence except for this one line of share, like our Arabic poetry, this is something that it doesn't hold a lot of weight in and of itself. Saying it was, and then if we said the poetry was something that was like that this was something that was acceptable poetry, like that this person was actually Arab at the time that was there, and we could say that in this time the Arabs actually used this phrase, which is only one, we only have one type of poetry that says this, then even the poetry itself, it still doesn't prove what they're trying to prove, because they have Arabic poetry that they use the word istawa, istawa alayhi, and that there was a man who istawa on a place of like as on a city and whatnot, and meaning that he conquered the city. And even this is the form of it is actually saying that he rose up above the city, meaning that he conquered it. So the meaning that is in the actual like the bait of shared, which we would call a line of Arabic poetry, actually is pointing towards the highness, and that he rose up over these people. So even this is still pointing to the original meaning, which is that Allah rose up over His throne when He says ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ, that Allah rose up above His throne. And of course, this is something that they will throw up these interpretations, and some of these interpretations are very, very far out. And some of them they have, like they're not as far out as others. But at the same time, the way that al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah they go about looking at these texts is they look at the apparent meaning, and if the apparent meaning is there and there's nothing that goes against it, and there's no evidence, so you would call it a qarina. If there's no evidence that is supporting evidence in the context that pulls it away from that apparent meaning, then we keep it at its apparent meaning. And this is something that if someone goes down this role of pointing things that it's a possible interpretation of a text, then there's no end to the amount of strange opinions that they're going to come up with, because anyone can twist and turn a text as they want it, And this is something that you can see with some of the people that will take. They will take a text and they'll twist it according to their own desires. And this is one of the reasons that like Ahlul Bid'ah, or the people of Bid'ah, were mostly referred to by the Salaf as Ahlul Ahwa, and that they would be the people they would be the people that follow their own desires, because this is something they would pull it away from the original truth. It's like the truth in the Quran and the Sunnah, it's apparent and it's there in front of them. And if someone goes against it, then they're following their own desires and whims. And this is something that, of course, is blameworthy. And that we as Ahl Sunnah, we don't fall into these things of following our desires and putting our own mind over the Quran and the Sunnah. And so the next thing that the author here he says, which is along the same path, is he says, ويعتقدون أن النصوص لا تأتي ويدفعون ما ظاهره التعارض بين صحيح النقل وصريح العقل. And so he says here that they put aside what seems to be a contradiction between authentic texts and plain reasoning. And so this is one of the key things, and with the way that we work with different texts. So sometimes we'll have a text that will maybe like the apparent meaning of it seems to be a contradiction with with what we would think, such as when Allah says that تُدَمِّرُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ بِأَمْرِ رَبِّهِ, and so like that Allah says when He was talking about about one of the punishments that Allah sent, that He says that it destroyed everything. It destroyed everything. And so if you say everything, you'd say, okay, then this is everything, including the whole world was destroyed because of this one people. But then in the rest of the ayah, it explains that and so that you couldn't see anything from their village except the places where they lived. And so okay, so then this is the explanation. Yes, everything. And a general meaning, you could understand it at its apparent as everything, like the whole universe was destroyed. But this is not the. But if you look at the rest of the evidence, okay, we see that it's not everything, but it's rather just it's explaining that like they were completely destroyed. Like these people, not necessarily the whole world and the earth and all the people that were in it. And so this is sometimes there'll be different things that come up in this way, and we put aside if there's an understanding that goes at odds with each other. When we put aside this the contradiction or the seeming contradiction. And a very important concept to understand is that the Quran and the Sunnah, if it is sahih and if it's understood properly, there's no contradiction. Like if it's authentic, when there's no if there's no difference of opinion, like its authenticity, then it will never go against each other. And so if it's authentic and it's understood properly, there will never be any contradiction. But sometimes there will be seeming contradictions that come from there'll be something that comes in one form, and then there'll be another thing that comes in another form, and these things come together. And this is something, of course, someone in usool al-fiqh, they look at how do we put these together, and also in hadith. They look at putting together the different hadith and coming to a ruling. And the person who understands it properly, there will never be a contradiction. But for someone who understands it improperly, there can be contradictions. Or the other thing is that if the hadith is not sahih, so you have a hadith that is da'if, which is weak and that is inauthentic, then a lot of times these inauthentic hadiths will go against the authentic hadiths. And this is also a sign that we know that you'll know that something is inauthentic, because it goes against other clear hadith. And so, and then we could look at the people who narrate it, and we can see issues in the chain of narration as well. But this is one of the things that is clear, that if there's an authentic hadith and there's authentic Quran, of course the Quran is authentic. But if we put these together with the right mindset and with a proper understanding, then these things will never have any contradiction. And in any contradiction that does come, then we look back at the text, and we also make sure that we're thinking about it in the proper way and understanding it as it would be understood by Arabs of that time, which is important. And so the next thing that he says here, we'll go back to what do we do in the case of if there seems to be a contradiction, like what is the process of that. But he says here, ويعتقدون أن النصوص لا تأتي بمحالات القبول وقد تأتي بما تحار فيه العقول. And so he says here that and they believe that the texts don't come with unacceptable impossibilities, but it may come with what pushes the mind to its limits and trying to fathom it. And so this is another key concept that Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he brought up this context, or this is from his words, that he talked about that there are sometimes things in the text that it's hard for us to put our minds around it. It's something that is very that's it's hard to fathom, like the immensity, such as like the Day of Judgment and the things that happen in the Day of Judgment that we see, that people, like, their sweat will come up and up to their knees, or their sweat will come up to their chest, or up to their face, to where their nose is like over the sweat, and like on that day. And so maybe if someone tries to understand how does this happen, this is something that is really hard to fathom, And also there's many other things on when it comes to like the things of that are the world of the unseen, and the things that come to us. Sometimes it seems very like hard to understand how could this possibly happen, such as like the parting of the Red Sea with Musa alayhi salam, and also some of the other miracles that happen. Maybe these miracles are something that's very fantastic. And so some of these things that are fantastic, yes, the Quran comes with things that are fantastic and with miracles and also with these things, but at the same time, the Quran does not come with impossibilities. And by meaning impossibilities is there's some things that they're very unlikely, and the reason they're unlikely is because it's just not what is normal in like normal day-to-day life. Like, of course, like the parting of the Red Sea, or some of these other miracles that come up. They're things that we don't see, and so we don't fathom them. But it's not something that is an impossibility, because This is something that Allah is the one who created everything, and so if Allah wants to create something in a certain way that is different than how we know it, then this is something Allah can do, and can do like these miracles for things. And we have no problem with the fact that these miracles exist, and we believe them, and we believe that the prophets, they came with these miracles and what Allah told us about these amazing things that are like they're improbable. Like you can say probably are improbable. That Allah can let these things happen and do these. But at the same time, there's certain things that are impossibilities, such as like we have someone that like impossibilities are something that doesn't come in. Like you say that something was talking while he was silent. So like if this person was talking while he was silent, these are things that go against each other. So if someone is silent, they're either silent or they're talking. And if he's talking, then he's not silent. And so like if you were to say that this person was talking and he was silent, this is a contradiction that's impossible to put together unless and there's certain things that are impossibilities, such as like that he was standing still and he was moving. Like these things are impossibilities for one. It's either one way or another. And so in these types of things, the text will never come with these impossibilities. But at the same time, the text may come with things that our mind can barely fathom. Or we don't know how Allah rose above His throne. This is not something for us to picture or try to imagine the how. What we know, Allah said it, and this is something that Allah knows best about Himself. He knows better than us, than Him about Himself and how that goes about. And this isn't something that we have to know. This is something that if Allah wanted us to know, He would have given us some type of understanding about the how. But Allah doesn't tell us to how. He tells us that it happened, and that's all all we need to believe is what Allah told us that it happened, and so that's what we take it as that. And so the next thing that he says here, of course, is that there will never be that contradiction that is an actual contradiction. And this is something that sometimes is talked about. For a contradiction to be actual contradiction, like tanaqud is what they would say, is that it needs to be in the same place. So maybe one thing is one thing is negated, and in another place it's affirmed. And so we would say that this is in one time and this is in another time, unless there is some evidence, of course, that shows that it's the exact same time. Then there's no like actual tanaqud, which is like there's no way to put it together. Like this is the impossibility for two things that are opposite for each other to happen in the same time. If they are something that, of course, they can't go together. And this is something that that is discussed in like more detail in like mantiq. They will talk about when do these things, like what is, for something to actually be tanaqud, there has to be certain like conditions that are met. It needs to be the same thing. It needs to be in the same time and place, as well as other things that they'll mention. And unless these things come together, then there's no actual like contradiction in reality. It's just something that seems it seems contradictory from like someone who looks at it without looking deeply into it. Because of course, if I told you that someone gave a good khutbah, and then I said they were sitting in Jumu'ah listening, okay, this was at one time and this was at another time, like that. We could say that this is, but unless I said it was on this day, then there's no contradiction between him giving a khutbah and him listening to the khutbah, and sitting and listening in the congregation. So there's certain things, unless we put it at the exact same time and place, if there's one thing that's negated and there's another thing affirmed, this is in one time and this is another time. As there's things that in the Quran where Allah mentions that there will be, no one will talk, they'll be silent on the Day of Judgment, and also that Allah will and that they will talk to, they will give like their excuses and whatnot, that people will give that. So this is at one time and this is at another time, and there's many things that happen on that Day of Judgment, so there's no actual contradiction between that. And the next thing the author here brings in is, he says, فَإِنْ وَقَعَ مَا ظَاهِرُهُ التَّعَارُض فَمَرَدُّهُ إِلَى الْوَهْمِ فِي صِحَّةِ الْعَقْلِ أَوِ الثُّبُوتِ وَالدَّلَالَةِ فِي النَّقْلِ. And so here he says, if something comes which seems to be a contradiction, then that goes back to a mistake either in sound reasoning or understanding the text. or its authenticity. So we'd look at these things, and there's somewhere there's a problem with one of these things. So if there's an actual something we've said that, okay, this is an actual contradiction, there's no way for us to understand it. And we would look back and see, okay, is this text authentic first? Like, see, is this an authentic text? And then if we see that this text is authentic, then we go back and we say, did I understand this properly? And this is where the issues come into these two places, where it's either the understanding, like I understood it improperly, so that's where I came up with my thinking that there was a contradiction. It's either in my understanding of the text, or it's the text is inauthentic in the first place. So then there's no then this is something, and we don't even take it into account in this place. So this is the way that one looks at this. If there is a contradiction, of course the problem's either with me, or it's in the authenticity of this text. And of course, if it's the Quran, we know that the Quran is infallible, and that the Quran there's no problem with its authenticity. So then we look at what is our understanding of the Quran, and how did the other people that came before us, how did they understand this, and put it together with the other things. And of course, this is something that this is something that the scholars before us, they have gone through and looked at the Quran and looked at these seeming contradictions, and they always have they have an answer that is very strong when it comes to anything that seems to be contradictory in the Quran. And this is something that in the Quran and in the Sunnah there's no contradiction, but sometimes you'll find these contradictions, such as in the the Gospels, like the Gospels that the Christians have in the New Testament. You'll find that there's contradictions. So then, like an example of a contradiction is that how did Judas Iscariot die in the Gospels? You have one where he says that he hung himself, and he killed himself, and then this is how he died. In another. And then you have in another one that he went and fell headlong into his demise, where his guts burst out. And so you have one way of dying, and you have another way that's contradictory to him hanging himself. And also in one of the stories, he had money with him that he threw back at the people who gave him money for betraying Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. And then in the other one, he goes with this money and he goes and buys a field. So this is something that's a contradiction. You can't put these two together. However you want to twist your mind around it, it's something that he either died this way or this way. There's no putting them both together. And he either bought the field or he threw his money away. Either this or these 40 pieces of silver or whatever. He either bought a field with it, and then it was named this, or he didn't buy the field with it, and he gave it back, one of these, or both of them. We don't necessarily say that any of the things are necessarily true, in that, unless it has some evidence from outside of it, because these are stories that are narrated. So they're basically stories in that. And so so this is something that is a contradiction that they have in their book, but you'll never find a contradiction like this in the Quran or the Sunnah that is authentic. There will never be this type of contradiction. And so the next thing that he mentions here is that we look back. So of course we look back to we either understood it properly, and we either didn't understand it properly if there's a seeming contradiction, or that there is a problem with the authenticity of the text. And this is usually where all of it comes down to. And he says also the understanding of the text or sound reasoning. Some people, they will say that sound reasoning, or the aql, says that this isn't possible. Such as that, the Mu'tazila, they used to negate that it's possible for Allah to speak. This is something that they would say is impossible because of their logical conclusions that they came up with, their debates and whatnot. Their logical conclusions put them into a place where they had to negate most of the sifat of Allah, or the attributes of Allah. They had to negate these to hold on to their position that they're arguing with. And so this is something that they fell into. And also, like them, the Ash'aris, they fell into a lot of sticky positions where if they say that if they say that Allah speaks with noise, then they think that they are saying that when Allah speaks and then we hear His voice when He speaks, then there must be some type of apparatus that we're hearing it with, and all of these other things, and then we can't say that Allah has an apparatus such as like vocal cords or something of this sort, because we have no evidence of this. And so they'll say, because they make this likeness, then they fall into a bunch of different areas, because they say that you're making Allah like the creation. But there's things that Allah is that has affirmed for Himself, that is in a way that is befitting for Him. So we say that Allah speaks, and the way that Allah speaks is something that is heard, and this comes in many hadith, that Allah will speak on the Day of Judgment, and then that people will hear Him, and He calls out on the Day of Judgment. And also in the Quran, countless places that Allah spoke and His voice was heard. And so we don't say that Allah has vocal cords and a tongue and all these other things, because we don't have any direct evidence with this. But at the same time, we know that when Allah speaks, His voice is heard, and it's a voice. It's not just some meaning that is interpreted by Jibril, and then he comes to us with His own wording. And this is something that the Ash'aris, they have a problem with the Quran being the actual word of Allah. Like, they will say that it's the meaning is from Allah, but the actual word is not something that Allah spoke the Quran with actual sound, and with actual, like, the letters and whatnot that came out. They will not say that Allah spoke the Quran that we have now. And so this is something that they say, okay, so who's the one that did this? And this is something they basically agree with the Mu'tazilis, that Allah doesn't speak and that the Quran is created. They basically totally agree with them that the Quran that we read now is something that is created, and this is something that is this is a belief that is a belief of kufr. But of course, these people, they have their ta'wil, which is something that like pardons them. It doesn't like take them out of Islam until like certain evidences have been established on like an individual. That is undeniable. So like nobody actually says that these people are disbelievers, but at the same time, what they're saying is something that is it's something that goes against the Quran and the Sunnah clearly, that Allah speaks and that His voice is heard when He speaks. And this is something that a person that looks into the Quran and the Sunnah, the amount of evidences that show this apparent meaning, to take it away from this apparent meaning and say that no, there was an angel of Allah that spoke instead of Allah. This is something that's very far out, and it's very far removed. And so this comes from their reasoning that they think is sound, and negating this is something that is actually not sound. And if they had their sound reasoning, if it was proper, then they would look at this and they would be able to accept it and say that Allah speaks in a way that we don't understand how it's heard, but Allah speaks with the voice and it's heard. And this is something that and that you don't have to understand the how for it to happen. And of course, someone, if they look at their body, like how do I raise my arm? We can look and see that there's different chemical reactions and that muscles pull and there's things that do this. But I don't need to know how. I don't need to know the how to know that it can happen. And this is something that that when their mind can't wrap around a thing, that a lot of people, they will throw away the truth because their mind can't wrap around it. And of course, we don't have to wrap our mind around all the details of something to know that it's true. And so the next thing that he mentions here is that, which is a very, very key thing, and which follows on what we were just saying, is he says, وَيَكُفُّونَ عَمَّا سَكَتَ عَنْهُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَأَمْسَكَ عَنْهُ الصَّحَابَةُ وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. And so this is something that he says they don't say something about that which Allah and His Messenger was silent about, and what the companions and those who followed them in goodness held back from. Radiallahu anhum. So this is something that is a very, very key concept about al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, is that we don't talk about things that we don't have knowledge about. And Allah, when He talks about what that shaitan, that he calls people to as-su'a wal-fahsha wa an taqulu 'ala Allahi ma la ta'lamun. And also, like, and for you to say about Allah that which you don't know. And so this is something that is very key when it comes to Aqeedah. We don't talk about things that we have no information about, like such as like how Allah speaks, or how Allah rose above His throne. Like, the meaning is known, like istawa is known, its meaning, and how is something that we can't necessarily fathom. This is something we can't fathom, and believing in it is obligatory. And this is what Imam Malik, that he said when he was asked about this issue. And this is a meaning that came up with the Salaf and even before him, that said this in general meaning. When it comes to these issues, we know, we know the general meaning of it, and this is enough for us. And we also we know that like the how is something we can't know this. We don't have any information on this. The only way we know how something happens is if we see it. And if we don't see it, then the only way we could know how something happens is if we saw something that was like it. And if we don't see something that's like it, then there's no way we can know how something happened. And this is, of course, with Allah. We didn't see Allah raise above His throne. So this is something we can't say how. And we also can't see anything that is like Allah raising above His throne, because laysa kamithlihi shay'. There's nothing that is like Allah. So we don't have anything we don't have a frame of like say that this is like this, and so Allah did it like this. And so because we don't have anything that is like Allah, then we don't have any way to go into this area. And so this is a key thing, that when it comes to these things that Allah and His Messenger was silent about, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that the companions and those who followed them, they didn't go into these issues, then in general we don't go into these issues. This is the basis. And we don't talk about some of these different things, like delving into details that we have no evidence about. And this is something that is a key difference between al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah and a lot of the people that went astray. And to note that there are some things that that once the people of bid'ah, they came up with certain like shubuhats, and they got involved into philosophy, and they went into this, and if this is like this, then this. Then in rebutting them, there are things that we previously, like al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, they would be silent about this. They would not talk about it out of respect for Allah, and out of respect for the Sunnah, and out of respect of not talking about things that there's no clear evidence for. But if like something comes about something and it has to be talked about, then al-Sunnah, then they will make it clear where they stand in this issue. And so this is something that it comes up from time to time, where there'll be something that no one spoke about before. Then some of the Ahlul Bid'ah, they will talk about this new concept, and then Ahlul Sunnah, they will have a response for that. And before then, the basis was we don't talk about these things. But once the shubha comes, then to fight the shubha, it's necessary for someone to talk about it. So then they talk about it, and they show the al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, they show where do we stand in this issue. And then they'll talk about it, and that only to the point where they have to talk about it. And they'll bring that up. And of course, the basis is that we don't talk about things that are unknown, that we have no knowledge about, and we don't say anything about Allah unless we have evidence to say this about Allah from Allah or His Messenger. And without that, then we don't say something about Allah without any knowledge. And this is very, very key. And this is of the greatest of the sins, is to talk about Allah, and of course also to talk about the deen of Islam without knowledge about it. And so like to just talk from what they think and what they suppose and whatnot. This is something we don't think and say things about Allah without knowledge about this. And some people will sometimes they'll say that Allah loves somebody or something. They'll say like individuals, and this is something that someone shouldn't say this, because we don't know if Allah really loves this person or not. If this person has iman, and he has taqwa, and he obeys Allah and whatnot, then according to his iman and his taqwa, Allah loves everybody according to their iman and taqwa. But we don't say Allah loves so and so and loves so and so, but rather we say Allah loves someone who has taqwa, because we don't look inside of people's heart to know that this person has real taqwa. And of course we hope for this person, but we don't say something individually about individuals, whether that Allah loves this person, or even about other people that individuals are in Jannah, unless there's evidence that comes from the Quran and the Sunnah that says this individual is that way. And of this goes in the way of talking about Allah in a way that we have not been given information. We've given general information, so we stick with this general information that all believers, they go to the Jannah. Anyone who died as a Muslim and they had that smallest grain of iman in their heart, then if they were to be put into the hellfire, they're taken out and entered into Jannah. Every single person that declares La ilaha illallah, then they are brought into Jannah. Well, of course, we don't know what their hisab is like and all of these other things, so we don't talk about it. And this is a general concept and principle that is very key for us as Muslims, is to stick with what we know, with what Allah has given us, and not to talk about things that Allah has not given us information about. And this is where a lot of the people that got involved in philosophy, they would give a bunch of extra attributes to Allah, or negate attributes of Allah, speaking about Allah with something that they don't have any evidence from the Quran or the Sunnah that is clearly giving them any evidence to say this. And this is very important, and something that when Imam Ahmed, when he was going through like the trials and tribulations of the people claiming that the Quran was created, was a creation of Allah, he told them, basically, he said, give me something. He's like, bring me something from the Quran or from the Prophet, give me something from Allah or from His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that I can say. Like, I'm not going to say what you guys are saying. You need to give me some type of evidence from Allah or His Messenger, and I'll speak with it. But if you don't give me anything from this, there's no reason for me to speak about Allah just because you guys have a philosophical concept that you came up with. This is not something that that he would not delve into this unless you give me something from the Quran and the Sunnah, and I'll say this, okay, from the Quran and the Sunnah. But if you can't give me any evidence from these two, then there's no point for me to agree with you in this matter, because you haven't come with evidence. All you have is your philosophical jargon and reasoning and this, that, and the other. And so this is one of the things that's very important. We stick with what Allah has given us and what the Prophet ﷺ has given us. And if the companions also, we look to what they were silent about. There's things that Allah had talked about that the companions, they would not talk about the details of these things. They would relate what Allah and His Messenger said, and they understood it and its apparent meaning, and they wouldn't say anything else about it. And if they were silent about this matter, then it's best for us to be silent about this matter too, because there's no reason for us to go into something. If it was good, they would have beat us to it, because they were the most they were the people that were the most keen on going towards everything that was good. And the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't leave us except that he guided us towards every good, and he called us and warned us from every evil, whether in a general sense or whether in a specific sense. And so the next thing, and going back to what he says here, is that he says, فَهُمْ مُجْمِعُونَ عَلَى التَّوْحِيدِ مَصْدَرِ التَّلَقِّي وتجريده عن كل شوب كلامي مردود أو الفلسفي مذموم ومسلكي مبتدع. And so he says here that they are, when referring to al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, that they're in unanimous consensus in their sources of taking the religion, which we talked about, which is the Quran, the Sunnah, and also like in clear reasoning, and also the fitrah that is not corrupted. So like the al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, they're completely in unanimous agreement about this thing, and they hold on to this. And they're also in agreement that we don't take things from the ilm al-kalam, or like the philosophy that is when we affirm things in the religion, that we don't take things from any of the kalami. We would say kalami because it's something that goes with ilm al-kalam, which is very close to philosophy, or blameworthy philosophical belief, or way of bid'ah, or like way of going about things that is something that is in contrary to the Sunnah and the way that the Prophet ﷺ worked and his companions. So anything that goes in this sense, then the al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, they are in complete agreement with the way that they take the Quran and the Sunnah, and then they take this at the understanding of the Sahaba that came after them. And of course, in looking at things in the proper way, and this is where we get our religion. And when it comes to using the philosophy of Aristotle or Plato to get our religion from, no, we don't need to go to other people to get our other religions or philosophy to get our religion. Of course, like if there's certain like logical concepts or like ways of reasoning that are helpful, that are like math pretty much, this is something like, you accept math and as it is, like we use math to make like inheritance and whatnot. We use it math because this is something that's logical. But if it goes into belief and whatnot, and it's something that goes at odds with the Quran and the Sunnah, this is something that we don't need it, and we reject these things. And the next thing he says here is وَيَعْتَمِدُونَ أَلْفَاظ ومصطلحات الكتاب والسنة عند تقرير مسائل الاعتقاد وأصول الدين ويعبرون بها عن المعاني الشرعية وفق اللغة العربية وفق اللغة القرآن وبيان الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he says here, which is a key point, and inshallah we'll end here, is that he says they rely on the wording and terminology of the Quran and Sunnah when affirming issues of belief and foundations of the religion. And they use them when explaining the meanings of the Sharia according to the language of the Quran and explanation of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a very important thing. Whenever we talk about something that is in the Deen, that we use the words that are used in the Deen to explain it. And when we have certain concepts that come up, we use the words that are in the Quran and the Sunnah first and foremost to explain these concepts, and we don't try to make up a concept or use different wordings for a concept that come from outside the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is something, of course, when someone understands Arabic, they'll understand that words can't just be changed with other words, or like the meanings will always be lost if you change from one word to another word. So if we have something that like a certain concept that we use the wording and the terminology that came in the Quran or the Sunnah in this particular aspect, but we don't use some type of new terminology that didn't come in the Quran and the Sunnah that could carry multiple different meanings, and maybe the meaning is a good meaning and maybe the other meaning is wrong. And this is something that a lot of the terminologies that come up with the people that went into philosophy and whatnot, they would bring up a new terminology that was never known about in the Quran and the Sunnah, such as arid, or like certain things such as they would say like arid, which is something that comes about. It's like a attribute to somebody that could be there at some times, and at other times it couldn't be. It wouldn't be there, but it's not from the essence of someone. And like some of these terms, and also johar, which is like the core essence of an actual thing. And so they would come up with these terms that these are far removed from the Quran and the Sunnah, and also from the Arabs of that time. If they heard these people speaking in this language and explaining these things, they'd be like, we don't know what you're talking about. This is something that's strange and out there, because this was something that holds meaning. Like Johar, as I mentioned, was like the people of philosophy and like of ilm al-kalam. They'll say that this is something like which is like the essence of something, like the true essence of an individual would be like the Johar or of anything. And they have kind of this whole kind of like concept about the world, that this is something that didn't come from Islam. It's something that's from outside of Islam and Aristotle and whatnot. And so when they got the Greek works translated into Arabic, they would fit different words in Arabic to try to see if it was close to the meaning that they found in Greek and like the Greek philosophy and whatnot. And so they would come up with these different words, and then they started using these words that they came up from philosophy and from mantiq and whatnot, and they would use these words instead of the words that come in the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is something like they would say that Allah is qadim, and qadim in Arabic means old. And so like old doesn't necessarily hold the greatest, like if you say like something is qadim, it's not new, like it's something that is you would say this about something. It could be either praise for something that like such as if we look at that Allah is eternal, like this is something, okay, eternal is a good word, but to say qadim in Arabic, this holds like a negative connotation, and that you would say like my hatifi qadim, like if I'd say my phone is old, like this doesn't hold a good a good thing. It means it's like something rickety. Or like my car is old, like this is something that we would stick to the terms that come in the Quran and the Sunnah, and when it comes to these certain things. And of course we know we'd say that Allah huwa al-awwal wal-akhir. So we'd say that huwa awwal, this is what comes in the Quran, which means he's the first, And this holds a essence of praise in about it, as opposed to saying qadim, which is something that means like old, like in Arabic. It would just mean like old, and old is not necessarily something that Allah hasn't and described himself with this word. But the people that got into kalam, they say that old is something that has no beginning. Okay, this is a good meaning. The meaning is good, and we affirm that Allah has no beginning. But at the same time, we don't use this word. We use the word huwa al-awwal. And so we say that he is the first. And the way that Allah said it with al-awwal, this is the word that we use, and we don't use these other words that could be understood in a good way. We take the meaning from it. If the meaning is good, then this is okay. And we use the word that came in the Quran and the Sunnah for this, and we have more than enough words that come in the Quran and the Sunnah to explain the meanings that anyone wants to come up and talk about. And using the terminology of the Quran and the Sunnah is something that is very, very key, and it keeps someone away from falling into mistakes in his speech, and also of talking about Allah, because if he sticks with what the Quran and the Sunnah was giving, these words hold immense meaning, and they can't necessarily just be explained in a single like sitting and whatnot. But if somebody understands these words, then they will hear this word, and it means so much. It has a lot of attention brought to it, especially if it's in the Quran. There's so much that the mufassirin, like the people that made tafsir, there's so much that they talked about in these actual words, and they talked about the meanings of these words. And when we use these words, they're packed with explanation and with meaning. But if we take some other words, then it's totally subject to disagreement. And from these things, and this is something we'll see that the Salaf and also the people that followed in their way, they will use the words and the terminologies, the wording and the terminology that came into or that came from the Quran, the Sunnah, to explain issues in the Quran, the Sunnah, and when we talk about it. But we don't take these other philosophical wordings and whatnot to explain these things, such as some of them will say that Allah is wajibul wujud, which means that he is the thing that is his essence, or his presence is something that is absolute, like it has to be, he has to be, like if he has to be in existence, like the thing that has to be into existence. And they use this as one of their terms of praise for Allah. And this is something that hasn't come in the Quran and the Sunnah. It comes from they went through their philosophical logical reasoning, and they say everything either is possible in its existence, or it's something that's impossible in its existence, or it's something that has to be in existence. And the only one that has to be in existence is Allah. So they call him the wajibul wujud, and they say that this is they make it almost as if it's a name of Allah. And this is something that Allah hasn't given us this name for him. And this is something that came from their speculation. So this is not something we need to use this word or this wording. Of course, the meaning of it, okay, the meaning is good. That Allah, of course, he has to have existed, and Allah has to exist, and everything goes back to him when it comes to his existence. But this can be understood in al-hayyul qayyum. You know, like this word that is the name of Allah, al-hayy, which is like the essence of living. That as like the epitome of essence of living, al-qayyum, the one that everything, it goes back to him in their existence, and that Allah is the one that oversees everything around him. And like the different names of Allah, they encompass such that have come in the Quran. They encompass so many more meanings than the meanings that are invented, you know, to say these things about Allah. And so this is a key thing. And if you read the books of the Salaf, or the people that followed in their way, such as Ibn al-Qayyim, if you read like his writing, like even the writing in the way of Ibn Taymiyyah, and their writing is something that's like Quran and Sunnah, because they will take the Quran and Sunnah, and everything that they say, they put pieces of the Quran and the Sunnah together, and they make their argument with the Quran and the Sunnah in the terminology of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they'll constantly be bringing you back to the Quran and the Sunnah in their wordings, even if they aren't necessarily quoting Quran and Sunnah. The terminology that they use is something that is completely pointing to the Quran and the Sunnah and using it as a reference point. And all of these things are constantly being used. They're not separated in something that's void from it. And of course, going into like the books of people that gone into ilm al-kalam, when you read their books, it's very, very it's very brainy, and it's something that is far removed from like the Quran and the Sunnah. You won't find the terminology of the Quran and the Sunnah in their books. It's something that is very foreign, and it's strange. And at the same time, it also holds like it holds a form of like it's not eloquent. Like it's something that's very strange to try to put your mind around the things that they'll talk about. It's something that is far removed from like of someone who knows Arabic. They will see that this is something that is far removed from the essence of how do Arabs actually speak, and how do they how do they explain themselves. It's very, very far removed from it, and it also points to that where these came from were people that were not Arabs when they're not Arabs in essence, and also they're explaining things in Arabic language, and but this is not like fluent or eloquent Arabic language either. It's something that's very, very like the term is like rickety, or something that is very ranky. It's not good at all. Like the form and eloquence of it, as opposed to if someone used the terminology of the Quran and the Sunnah for these things, maybe the meaning is good, but if they use the Quran and the Sunnah for it, it would be something that would flow, and it would be something that is much more easy and also holds more weight in what they're saying. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah, we'll stop here for today, and in the next class we'll go into a very important topic, which is how do we deal with differences of opinion. And inshallah, this will be what we discuss either next week or the week after.
فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم لا حجة بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير.